Back and better than ever, Greeny with you, presented by Progressive Insurance. Guests today, and there'll be several on the Shell Pennzoil Performance line. They will include a super high-profile Pac-12 football coach, David Shaw, Stanford, live in a half hour. Are his players asking to transfer? We'll ask him. Should they be allowed to? We'll ask him. Plus, Bob Costas in an hour. And Jalen Rose preaching on Get Up this morning. You will get your chance to respond at the end of this hour. But we begin with this.
Luka lists to his left, shoots a three, and connects. Luka with 19, 6, and 7 in the first half.
If you were starting an NBA team right now and you could have your first choice of any human being walking the face of planet Earth, you started with Luka Doncic. And that's it.
9 to shoot. Luka on the drive, floats it in. Dallas by 12 with 90 seconds to go.
Should put it to bed.
Clippers are in trouble. Are they going to be able to adjust for Game 3 to take control of this series? I'm not so sure about it right now.
They're a good team. Just goes to show you the West is tough. The AFC just beat the first team yesterday. And the West is tough. It's a tough conference.
Oh, we've got trouble in the Western Conference of the NBA in the bubble. It's time for Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. That was the question I asked to Tim Legler. I'll ask it of myself now. The Clippers have been a lot of people's championship pick since before the season began. Not mine, but many other people. The question is, are they in trouble in this first round? And the answer is yes. If you made me bet an amount of money that mattered to me, I would still take them to win this series. But this is not going to be easy. Because in every quarter of the 2 games that have been played so far that Kristaps Porzingis was eligible, the Mavericks have been the better team. If he doesn't get thrown out of Game 1, I continue to say disgracefully, they were going to score about 130 points in that game. They scored 127 last night. The Clippers are a great defensive team, and they are being worked by this Mavericks offense, which was one of the great offenses in the history of the sport by the numbers, and they're backing it up. And they got a lot of contributions last night. Their bench was sensational last night. Boban comes off the bench and gives them big minutes. Seth Curry comes off the bench and gives them big minutes. But this is all about Luka. Legs this morning said on my show, you heard a little clip of him there, said we are entering the decade of Luka. And that's what it is. This is about to become Luka's league. The NBA is going to be Luka's league when the current generation moves away. Right now, it's LeBron's league, KD, Kawhi. It's their league. They own this league. The national basketballs, and Steph. Put Steph in there. Not fair to him. Their league. They are the faces of the NBA. Luka Doncic is next. He's got next. Ahead of Giannis and ahead of anybody. Luka Doncic is ridiculous. There was one player in the history of the NBA who has scored more points in his first 2 playoff games than Luka Doncic. That was George Mikan in 1949. Google him. It's 20 years before I was born. Luka Doncic is spectacular. And he single-handedly has this team in serious trouble. Now, again, I believe in Kawhi. Paul George won't play that badly again. Jalen said to me today, their intestinal fortitude, their manhood has been challenged by this. Paul George was getting roasted on Twitter last night when he had a scoreless first half. He'll come out and play great. I still believe they'll win the series. But it's going to take them a while. And that sort of thing tends to compound itself as the postseason goes along. So are the Clippers in trouble? Yes. I believe they're in a level of trouble that the Lakers are not. Meanwhile, another quick thought on Luka and Porzingis and the Mavericks, and what they are, and maybe what someone else isn't. Jay Williams this morning on our morning show said this.
I'm not worried about the Clippers as much as I am in awe of the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks are everything that the Philadelphia 76ers want to be.
That's it. That's exactly right. The Dallas Mavericks are the process. The process worked in Dallas because they got the right guy. In Philadelphia, they kept getting the wrong guy over and over and over again, and they didn't have the infrastructure around even when they got the right guys. And now they're going to change coaches because they're getting humiliated in this playoff series, with or without Simmons. But the reality is Simmons is terrific. He's a terrific player, and he will be a perennial all-star. But Luka Doncic is going to be the best player in the NBA for the next 10 years. He may already be. If he isn't, he's damn close. So the Mavericks are exactly what the Sixers wanted to be. And I say that looking in part at my producer, Cliff, who is from Philadelphia and is a crazy fan of all things Philly. And I feel your pain. I'm sorry for you. I'm a lifelong fan of the Knicks. So believe me, I'm staring up at you and everybody else. But the Sixers are in trouble. They're done. They're dead in their series. That's over. And it would be, they wouldn't win this series even if they had everybody healthy. And I've thought for a while, and Jalen Rose was saying it from the day we launched Get Up, April 2nd, 2018. Jalen Rose said, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons should not be on the same team. They don't fit together. They're two pieces that don't fit together. They are a round hole and a square peg, or whatever things there are that don't fit together well. I always get that one wrong, too. Anyway, they're that. Porzingis and Luka are perfect, and they are exactly what the NBA is going to be. Luka's a guy with the ball in his hands who is a magician, who sees things before they happen, and Porzingis is 7'3" and shoots threes. He's got 35-foot range. You want to talk about the NBA of the 2020s. The Mavericks are the next team. They've got next. They may not win this series. They might. They might still fool around and actually beat the Clippers in this series. Wouldn't shock me. I still don't expect it. But even if they don't, they are the future. Way more than Philly is, more than anybody is. The Mavericks are the future. And the Clippers right now are in trouble. Straight Talk Wireless, no contract, no compromise. Let me say one more quick thing about the NBA. Tonight is the draft lottery. I'll talk to Bilas about that coming up in about 10 minutes. It's not nearly as eagerly anticipated, obviously, as last year because you don't have Zion. But the one thing I will be most interested to see is, do the Warriors get the first pick? Or do they pick high? Do the Warriors wind up very high in this lottery? Because I don't know. We'll ask Bilas, because I will confess I don't really know. How significant is the drop-off from first to second to third to fourth in this draft? How high up do you have to be to get someone who's going to help you win a championship next year? Because if the Warriors should all come back healthy next year and add one more really meaningful piece, who knows what they could be? So that feels like the thing worth watching more than anything else in the draft lottery tonight. I mentioned Bilas coming up in just a few minutes. Bob Costas off the top of the next hour, my idol. A ton of things I want to get to with him. But in the meantime, I want to change briefly to something else, because the other subject that is of particular interest to me in sports right now is what's going on in college football. And maybe part of this is because I went to school in the Big Ten. My daughter goes to school in the Big Ten. I have an affinity for the conference. And the Big Ten and the Pac-12, as you obviously well know, have decided they're not playing football this fall. And yesterday, the commissioner of the Big Ten released an open letter to the Big Ten community in which he used the words, "The decision will not be revisited." And I'll admit I was disappointed when I saw that, because there was a part of me that sort of wondered and maybe even hoped that this Justin Fields movement and the parents and everyone else who have been clamoring here, that they might be successful. They might convince the Big Ten leadership to revisit this decision. It's been made clear they will not. And here's what I will say about what has happened. Kevin Warren he's the commissioner of the Big Ten. He's being heavily criticized from a lot of different directions. Here's what I will tell you. These are good people, and they are by no means stupid people. They just didn't get this quite right. They just didn't get the way this was communicated quite right. To make a decision of this magnitude, and I will agree with my friend Paul Feinbaum, who said, probably the most significant decision in the history of college football, to not play this season. That can't be something that isn't communicated clearly to your coaches, your players, and your families. All of them deserve total transparency and a full understanding of what went into the decision. And that brings me to my final point. I asked this question to Paul. I'm going to ask it to Bilas, and I'm asking it to you. If the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC are able to play a season to its completion and crown a champion, is it automatically true that the Big 10 and the Pac-12 got this wrong? I don't know that it is. I don't know that it isn't. I'd like to know what you think. Use the hashtag Greeny, @hashtag Greeny, tweet some thoughts. We'll read some of those. I'm going to take some phone calls at the end of this hour, and I will ask Bilas that question when he joins us in a few minutes. If they play a full season this year, does it automatically mean the Big Ten and the Pac-12 got it wrong? Check out ESPN Audio at home by telling Alexa to play news from ESPN. ESPN Audio at home is brought to you by Mercedes-Benz Vans. Drive a Mercedes-Benz van. Find out how far an extra mile really goes. From customization and service to financial assistance, Mercedes-Benz Vans are ready for anything. I'm ready for Jay Bilas and David Shaw and Bob Costas. As we get going, it's Greeny.
ESPN News.
You're over my head, I'm out of my mind, thinking I was born in the wrong time, one of a kind, living in a world.
I like this song. We're back here, Greeny, with you on ESPN Radio and on TV on ESPN News, presented by Progressive Insurance. Joining me now, one of my favorite guys. Busy tonight, draft lottery. Jay Bilas with us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Hello, Jay.
Greeny, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's good to talk. And before we get to the business there, I'd like to talk to you about what's going on in college football right now. And anyone who follows Jay on Twitter and other places knows that you are one of the most insightful and interesting opinionists when it comes to all things that involve the concepts of amateurism and the NCAA and all the rest of it. And so the question I asked here just a moment ago, I'd like to ask to you is, in your mind, if the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC are able to complete a football season and play a championship and it all comes together reasonably well, would it automatically be true that the Big 10 and Pac-12 made the wrong decision?
No, that's a really good question. I think to unreasonable people that don't want to look at the entire picture, they may be able to, use that one thing and say, because the SEC and the rest were able to cobble together a season, therefore the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and all the other smaller conferences were wrong. And they're all making different decisions. It's not all the same data. And I'm not sure the Pac-12, no matter what the protocols were, could pull this off simply because of the area of the country where they are, that the spread and transmission rates are so high in California and Arizona that it may not be feasible throughout the course of the football season. I mean, my understanding right now, and look, I've not been looking at this state by state, but that USC, UCLA, Stanford, and Cal can't even practice. Even if they could go forward, decide to go forward to the season, they'd have part of their league couldn't even practice. And so it made it difficult. And I feel badly for everybody involved. But, we could be looking – but there are two things on it. We could be looking back and saying that Kevin Warren and Larry Scott were ahead of the curve and made the right decision in advance of everybody else. But if the SEC, Big 12, ACC, God forbid, have some sort of catastrophe, then they're going to have to answer for that. And that's, I think, what a lot of people are really worried about.
The other question I have is, assuming the other conferences do play, and I'm going to talk to David Shaw from Stanford in just a moment here, do you believe that the players in the Big Ten and the Pac-12 should be allowed to transfer right now without hardship if there are places that are interested in bringing them in?
Not to play this year. It's a very unfortunate circumstance that you have a number of players that will not be able to play. But there's certain aspects of this that just can't be helped. It's like, you don't want to make this too simplistic, but it's like if you have a canceled flight, you just don't kick everybody off the next flight just because the first flight got canceled and pile them into the next plane. That's a real problem for other players that have made commitments to play, and all of a sudden they're going to have players piled on top of them. And so I don't think that's a feasible, workable solution. There are tons of contradictions in this, and the Division I Council, I think, ruled yesterday that no matter how many competitions you have this year, they're not going to count them, that kind of thing against your eligibility, which starts to pile players up in future years. And so it's difficult for incoming players that didn't think they were going to have to deal with certain players coming back. So there are a lot of problems that this is going to cause, and everybody's going to have to adjust.
I think you're right. And I've said this so many times now, sometimes I worry that I'm repeating myself, but I think it bears saying once more, in a pandemic, there are just more questions than there are answers. And that's one thing that we've all figured out, I think, since March, and that continues to be the case here. I want to let everybody know Straight Talk Wireless has the full court cell phone coverage you need. Just $45 a month gets you the unlimited plan with 25 gigs of high-speed data, then 2G for up to 50% less than the big carriers. Only at Walmart. Savings may vary. See terms and conditions at straighttalk.com. Meanwhile, Bill is with me here. You've got the lottery tonight. So we don't have Zion in this draft and John Morant, some of these names who became household names. Give us the names of the 2 or 3 players. Now, let me rephrase that question. Where is the drop-off? If we're looking at what pick do you have to get tonight to get a player who you believe will be a significant difference maker on the next level quickly?
Quickly is the issue. I don't think this is a great draft, Greeny. There are some very good players and some prospects that have a chance to be very good players, but it's not there's no headliner to this one, kind of a must-see player. Certainly right away, and there are a lot of question marks that come with these players, but there are a lot of good options. So the top 3, I would say, consensus would be Anthony Edwards out of Georgia, who's a freshman, averaged about 20 points per game. But he's got some question marks. Like he's wired to score, multi-dimensional scorer, superior athlete, kind of like an Eric Gordon type of offensive talent. But he's not a great decision maker. He's not efficient. He takes a ton of shots to score his points. Didn't get to the free throw line as often as that athletic body should suggest. And not a great defender, kind of an indifferent defender, frankly. And then James Wiseman, who went to Memphis and played only 2 or 3 games before that NCAA issue kind of caused him to leave college basketball. 7'1", left-handed, kind of a Chris Bosh type of talent. That I think the only question with Wiseman is in today's game, is he going to be able, because he can shoot it, is he going to be able to step away and really be a guy that can drop threes? I think he can do it, but it's going to be something he's going to have to work on. It's not an automatic. But he knocks down over 70% of his free throws. He rebounds at a high rate. He can block shots. So 10 years ago, he was the first pick, and it wouldn't have been much of a question. And then I say the third is probably LaMelo Ball, who played in Australia professionally, Lonzo Ball's younger brother. He's a point guard that Mike Schmitz has said is the most talented prospect in the draft. Very creative as a passer and good in pick and rolls, but not a super dynamic athlete, and he does not shoot the ball well. He's got kind of a two-handed release. And then you really start wondering in today's game, if you're not a good shooter, because Anthony Edwards can shoot it. His question is shot selection, but he can shoot it. Ball does not shoot it well, and neither did his brother Lonzo. And that's been a problem for Lonzo. So you're kind of picking, but Greeny, when you're asking there are going to be players further down in the draft that are going to have, maybe they'll have Donovan Mitchell type impact. You just don't know, like Tyrese Halliburton of Iowa State or Isaac Okoro out of Auburn. There are going to be players like that are going to surprise us. And the problem is throwing the dart at the right spot on the dartboard to find out who it is. And I'm just not sure. There are a bunch of players that have a lot of ability and upside, but they also have a ton of question marks, which is not usually the case at the top of a draft.
We'll start to find out tonight. Bilas and Company with you, 8:30 Eastern on ESPN for the lottery, and that will be followed by the Lakers playing Game 2 against Portland, a game that LeBron and company need to win. Thank you, Jay. We'll enjoy it tonight.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Greeny.
Absolutely. That's Bilas with me on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Pennzoil synthetic motor oils made from natural gas gives you unbeatable engine protection. The proof is in the Pennzoil, based on Sequence 4A wear test using SAE 5W30. Coming up next, I will ask a coach from the Pac-12 if his players want to transfer and if they should be allowed to. To welcome into the program now someone who can add, I think, interesting perspective to a lot of the conversation that we've been having. He's the head football coach at Stanford, has been for a while. One of the most respected people in college football is David Shaw. Coach, thank you very much for spending a few minutes. How are you this afternoon?
I'm great. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. I appreciate it. And, we've been talking a lot about this on my television show in the mornings, and there are so many opinions. I went to school in the Big Ten, so I'm hearing a lot of that reaction from people, and there seems to be, at minimum, a lot of people questioning the way the decisions were made and the way they were communicated in the Big Ten, all the way up to a lot of people who seem to be really angry about it. How would you characterize the reaction by and large, throughout your conference to the decision that was made not to play this fall?
Well, I can't attest to anything that's going on in the Big Ten. I've been fortunate. I've been on our Pac-12 working group to solve the COVID issues. I've also been on the NCAA working group to work through these COVID issues and return to play. So for us, we've tried to keep everyone in the loop, our players, our parents. We've gotten a lot of advice from the doctors. Our process, as many of these processes started, which is, should we and can we play safely during a pandemic? Those are the two questions that, honestly, for me, still haven't really been answered. And when you bring up the potential heart abnormality, which isn't a guarantee, but caused a lot of doctors to have some concern, understandably concerned, because this virus, we find out something new every single week, that there are potential short and long-term issues with this virus. On top of that, were these neck gaiters that we're using and shields and masks, there's no guarantee that those mitigations can actually stop transmission of the disease, of this virus. And at the same time, contact tracing becomes very, very difficult. So if someone does slip through because we're tested only once a week or twice a week or 3 times a week and gets to a practice or gets to a game, everyone that person has contact with now goes into quarantine for 2 weeks. And that's a hard thing to look at going into a season and believing that you can make it all the way through.
So you were a part of this, and you have more insight into this than a lot of people I've spoken to. What was your reaction to the decision to postpone? You personally?
For me personally, once again, I'm in a lot of these meetings, and we try to keep all of our players and their parents in close communication. I've said from the very beginning to all of our players, as a lot of our coaches did in the Pac-12, we are going to follow the advice of the doctors. That's the best course that we can take for your short and long-term health. So as the heart abnormality came out, as we talked about these different mitigating factors, as we looked at the potential for starting to practice, and we cannot create a bubble in college athletics. And once again, we're talking just about football, but this is not just football. This is men's and women's soccer. This is women's volleyball. This is all of the fall sports. We cannot create a bubble on our team, let alone on our campus, let alone in our communities. So we kind of saw the writing on the wall as this heart abnormality came out, and we talked about these neck gaiters and these different mitigating factors that might not help us. We try to let them know that this might not happen. So when the decision came out, what I experienced from my student athletes was gratitude. Gratitude to our administration, gratitude towards our process to say, you know what, you made the decision not based on money. You made the decision not just based on getting everybody out there to play because we want you to play or you want to play. We made the decision based on the medical evidence that we have right now, and not that it's guaranteed, but the fact that we have so many things that are unanswered, and I hate not having answers for the young men that play for me. So what I experienced from my student athletes was a lot of gratitude.
David Shaw, head football coach at Stanford, with me on ESPN Radio. I'm sure there are some players, however, in your conference as well as in the Big Ten who feel their opportunity to get to the next level someday is being inhibited by this. What should a reasonable transfer policy be during this extraordinary circumstance for players who are interested in trying to go to a place where they can play this season, if indeed that opportunity exists, because they feel like their ultimate opportunity to play in the NFL depends on it?
Well, 2 things for me. I want to dispel the myth that every single student athlete that's playing football, their only focus is the NFL, and they'll do whatever it takes to get there, leaving teams, et cetera, during a pandemic. The big question to really answer is, why transfer for a maybe? What gets lost in a lot of this is twice in the last week and a half, the chief medical officer of the NCAA has said something has to drastically change for there to be fall sports in college. That's a big statement from the man who's at the top of the food chain when it comes to athletics. And yes, it's the heart abnormality. Yes, it's all these things. And I've heard multiple doctors say in the last month that the worst thing that you can do during a pandemic is take a group of people from one location, travel to another location, engage with another 100 individuals in physical activity, and then travel back to your original location. Regardless of sport, that is not a great idea to do in the middle of a pandemic. So if something doesn't change in the next month, I don't know that the ones that are, and God bless them if they can make it, I don't know, but the ones that are trying to play, I don't know they're going to be able to.
David Shaw from Stanford with me. What are your thoughts on the possibilities of football in a different season? They call it spring football. I've seen some models where it might start as early as January, others where it would start later. What are your thoughts on that?
I've resorted to calling it winter football. I think the physical nature of this sport, the most important thing is not just when we start, but when we finish. We have to recognize that the fall of 21 is still our primary focus, and we cannot affect our young men in such a way that they cannot get back for that fall of 21. So if we can play, once again, the virus will still have to change nationally for us to play in the winter anyway. But if we can start in January and maybe end in March, you can make a case by augmenting your on-campus spring football that if you finish in March, you can have a way of ramping your young men down, getting a good off-season work, and then starting to maybe train in June to truly get ready for September. To me, that makes sense. Anything later than March, I think you're going to have a hard time really convincing these young men, their families, and a lot of coaches that that's good for their bodies and good for the fall of 21, which still has to be our main focus.
Coach, there's one other thing I'd like to ask you. It's been such an extraordinary time that we have lived through in so many ways, and many of the players in your conference, including on your own team, have been leaders through this. We have seen, obviously, through the pandemic, through much of the social unrest involving issues of racial inequity and things like that have happened. And I wonder if through this period you believe there are lasting changes that we might see to the structure of college sports as we have always known them. And if so, what you would anticipate those might be.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one of those completely unanswerable questions, but I will say this. This has forced a lot of people to widen their gaze and look at a lot of things, not just in college athletics, but a lot of things that we're doing nationally. And one of the things I'm most proud of coaching these young Stanford men is them getting involved and letting their voices be heard and getting engaged and watching them mature through these really difficult conversations, to many of them standing up for their rights, to have a safe environment and to have their voices heard and to be responded to from leadership. I applaud that. I'm in college athletics to mentor young men and help them become great husbands and fathers down the road, and whatever they play professional sports or not. So I've been proud of how a lot of our young people have handled this situation. They understand that this is a crazy, crazy, unheard of environment that we're in right now. And at some point in time, we will be on the backside of it. So all we can do during difficult times is learn and grow and band together and fight through it and get to the point where we can look back and say, man, that 20 season was unbelievable, all the stuff that happened, but we're better for it.
Coach, that's really well said. And I will tell you that despite the fact that I went to Northwestern and you beat us soundly week 1 last year, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much for making the time. Please stay healthy and please take care of everybody there. And I hope we'll do it again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Greeny.
All right. That's David Shaw, head coach at Stanford. I'm Greeny. We're presented by Progressive Insurance. Quoting home insurance just got easier with Progressive's Home Quote Explorer. Quote and buy all online at Progressive.com. All right, coming up next, I'm going to take some phone calls for the first time on this show. I would like a reaction to this. Jalen Rose said something on Get Up this morning, and I thought it was extremely well said. I'm going to ask TV to play that for me, if you would, please, here. This was Jalen Rose this morning on Get Up.
As a conference and coaches, if you want them to play, that's fine. But if other students aren't allowed to be on campus, that means you're now treating them like employees. And from what I know, employees get the opportunity, if they're not essential workers in theory, to decide in this climate if they feel comfortable going to work or not. So therefore, if you want them to come to work, pay them. Pay them. And yes, therefore, if they're not being paid, you should be able to transfer.
That's the question. If they're being treated on some level like essential workers and they're not being paid, should they be allowed to transfer? I'd like to hear your opinion. 888-SAY-ESPN is my phone number. Give me a call. We'll take your call coming up. All right, Greeny back with you. Time for the Progressive Major League Baseball Snapshot. 2 big games on ESPN Radio this weekend. Saturday, first place Dodgers host the Rockies. And on Sunday Night Baseball, first place Braves battle the Phils. It's brought to you by Progressive's Home Insurance. Get your quote at Progressive.com today. My phone number is 888-SAY-ESPN. I want to know what's on your mind. Jalen said it this morning. He said if the football players in college are essential and they aren't being paid, how can you tell them they can't transfer? 888-SAY-ESPN. I'm coming to your calls in a minute. But Liam sent me this story. And again, for those of you who don't know me, I want to give you an indication of my thoughts on certain things. Cleveland Browns cornerback Kevin Johnson has been hospitalized after he suffered a lacerated liver during practice. A lacerated liver. It then says he's expected to be in the hospital for another day for observation. A day? A lacerated liver? I feel like if I suffered a lacerated liver, I would first gather the media around me while lying on the practice field and announce my retirement, and B, I'd be in the hospital for at least a year. A lacerated liver. Doesn't even seem possible to me. This is just another example of how incredibly tough and insane you have to be to play football. All right, 888-SAY-ESPN. Jalen said, if the football players in college are essential and they're not getting paid, how can you tell them they can't transfer? I'd like to hear from you and hear what's on your mind. Chris, you're on ESPN Radio, my first caller ever. Chris, what do you think?
Wow, first of all, I'm honored to be your first caller. First, I think Jalen's assuming that they're employees to be essential, to then go to the essential step. They're not employees. They're not getting paid. If you look at the definition of employees, they're students. They're receiving the benefit of an education. It would be ridiculous to automatically deem them employees just because one segment of the student body is not allowed to come back to school, and this certain segment is allowed to come back.
Well, Chris, let me ask you. Can I just ask you, because I want to talk about it a little bit, and I don't have an enormous amount of time. If the rest of the student body is not there, at North Carolina, the coach, Mac Brown, said, it is better for our football players if the rest of the students aren't here. That means, if they're not students, then what are they? If they're not the same as the rest of the students and you want to say they're not employees, then what are they?
Well, they are students. They're still students. They're in a program that is able to operate. There could be a program, let's say a deep sea diving program that is able to go and socially be distant and still go forward with their program. That's what I'm
Chris,
saying.
Is there any question but that the reason that this program is continuing to operate is because of the enormous amount of money?
Of course. Yeah. Of course. Don't get me wrong. We know the real reason.
Right.
But I think you can automatically deem them that and get accepted as employees is what I'm saying. But we know that what's driving it. What's driving it is the revenue. Absolutely.
So should they be allowed to transfer? In your mind, should a player be allowed to transfer if he wants to in these circumstances?
I would say yes, it would be fair. But in my mind also, this is a pandemic that we're dealing with, so everybody has to suffer consequences. I agree. But if we can lessen that to a certain degree and mitigate that for the students by letting them transfer, I would be okay with that. But I think we have to keep in mind that we're all dealing with things that we're not used to. All the different sports that have been canceled, Wimbledon, the Olympics, people training for 4 years. Mm-hmm. So I think we do have to, I think we're coddling the football players a little bit because we're trying to make them not suffer what everyone else in the world has had to suffer from. But it's okay. If we can do that, we can do it. But if we can't, then we can't. That's why I don't condemn the Pac-12 or the Big Ten for shutting it down. Big picture. I'm looking at the big picture.
I got you.
We've all suffered some things we would never ordinarily go through.
That's true.
But anyway, thanks.
Chris, I appreciate the call. Thank you, my man. I appreciate you calling, and I don't see it the same way, but I appreciate the perspective. I think that we should try to minimize the impact of this on everyone that we can, to whatever degree we can. Yes, obviously, all of us are making sacrifices and being impacted by the pandemic, but clearly, as much as we can mitigate those, I would assume everyone would want to. Tyron, I believe it is next on ESPN Radio. Tyron, what do you think?
Well, Greeny, first of all, man, thanks for taking my call, man. You my favorite dude when it comes to sports, man.
Thank you.
Greeny, I don't think I disagree with Jalen wholeheartedly, and they're not employees; they're student athletes. But my biggest thing about the whole situation is they need to stop putting this money before these kids' life, their health. None of them should be playing football. If one could play, all should play, or none should play. And no, I don't think they should be able to transfer. Okay, what happens in 2021 if we have a firefly epidemic? You gonna change the rules again? No. Look.
Tyron, I think I lost you there, but I appreciate the thought, and I think I understand where you were headed with that. And this is, again, I respectfully disagree completely. This is not something that I think you look at it and say, well, what happens next year? I believe, I certainly hope, we are living through a once-in-a-century event. The magnitude of what is going on right now with the coronavirus pandemic cannot be overstated. This is something that we've not seen on planet Earth in almost exactly 100 years. So I do think all rules go out the window. I think a pandemic is a time when all rules go out the window. And you just do whatever seems to be in the best interests of the largest potential number of people immediately. And here's what I'd say. If it's not safe for them to play, then it should go without saying that they shouldn't play. I don't believe that the people who are, I understand how cynical we have become. And I certainly raise my hand. I can be as cynical as anybody else. I genuinely don't believe for a moment that any of these people making these decisions would be playing this game if they thought that these young men were going to die from playing it. I don't believe it for a moment. And if they feel they cannot be assured of that they will ultimately not get played. Remember, all the Big 12, the ACC, and the SEC have done is delay this. They haven't said, we're playing September 26th no matter what else happens. They've just said we're not shutting it down yet. If they wind up playing, I believe it will be because they genuinely believe they can. Anyway, we see it differently. It's what makes the world go round. I'm glad that you called. I'm glad to know what's on your mind. It's brought to you by My Computer Career, training for a better life. We will make sure to set aside time to do that regularly here because it's important that I don't just sit here behind this microphone and think that mine is the only opinion that matters. Yours matters just as much. Meanwhile, Bob Costas, who to me is the smartest person in sports, will answer a whole bunch of questions. He joins me live next on
This is Greeny with Mike Greenberg on ESPN Radio and on ESPN News.
Yes, it is. Back and better than ever. Greeny presented by Progressive Insurance. My guests on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. They include Bob Costas, who'll join us here in a second. And a little later in this hour, we'll talk to David Pollack. Been a busy morning. A lot I want to get into with Bob. When we first sort of put together the structure of this radio show, one of the things we did was try and set aside some extra time in one spot in the show that we could use to have a little extra time with certain guests. And over this week, we've done that. We've had Charles Barkley. We've had Brett Favre, and we'll have Costas in a minute here. And we'll get into some more of what we've been talking about. I opened the show this morning by telling you I believe the Clippers are in real trouble because they're playing the best player in the sport. Right now, Luka Doncic. Doncic and Dame Lillard right now are playing better than anybody. Lillard's the most underappreciated great player in basketball, and Doncic is on the verge of being the best player in the whole sport. Tim Legler said on my television show this morning on Get Up that the next decade is going to be the decade of Luka, and I totally agree. In the meantime, I'm waiting to see someone give me a thumbs up if Bob is ready to go, and we will have him in just a moment here, and I will explain a quick moment. Not yet. We're trying to get that set up there with Bob. So I'll briefly tell you a little bit more about the basketball. Then tonight is the draft lottery, and then he's ready to go. Okay, so as I said, this is a spot that we sort of designed to be able to have a little extra time for people who are particularly interesting. And as God is my witness, I said to Ray, who's sitting in the other room, we need to have special extra time, for days that we have someone like Bob Costas on. And I've said many times, he's heard me say it many times, that there were two people who were the most influential in the sports broadcasting world in my life. Howard Cosell in my youth, who was the reason I wanted to be a sports announcer, and then Bob Costas, who has been the announcer that I have idolized throughout my career. And it is a delight for the first time in this reincarnation of my radio career to have Bob Costas on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Greeny. You have been reinvented so many times, I can't even trace the arc and the bends and twists in the road of your career.
Well, if anyone could, you could. And certainly if anyone could narrate it poetically right off the top of their head, you probably would. And I would ask you to do that, but I have more important matters to get to with you today. So here's the first thing I want to ask you about. Fernando Tatis Jr. For those who are not following this story, is a 21-year-old phenom. He might be the most exciting young player in the game of baseball. He's on the San Diego Padres. He currently leads the major leagues in home runs. And he created a bit of a kerfuffle earlier this week by, in a game against the Rangers, with a 7-run lead and the bases loaded, he hit a grand slam on a 3-0 pitch. He was browbeaten by, among others, his own manager and a few other people around the world of sports. But in this case, sort of illustrating the chasm between the traditionalists or the old school of baseball versus those who view it in a more contemporary way, there was a lot of people that I would not have expected to who were defending him, including, and I read these on the air yesterday, Johnny Bench and Reggie Jackson, who I would usually expect to be on the other side of this divide. So it has brought up again a lot of the old school versus we need to drag this traditional sport into the modern age, a lot of those arguments. So as you have watched this play out, what were your thoughts on this incident and the conversation that has followed?
Well, one small point. His manager has said that he put the take sign on. So either Tatis Jr. missed the take sign or he ignored it. I don't think it's a federal case either way, but that does factor in a little bit. But here's what I'd say. Individual stats matter. Winning the game and the team matters more, but individual stats do matter. The pitcher wouldn't want the umpire to say, look, we want to get out of here. It's getaway day, whatever it might be. Anything. Actually, what I was about to say makes no sense, and I've fallen down a notch in your estimation. I guess I was your idol, and now I said something that was going to be backwards, which is sometimes, remember, the old rule was, look, it's getaway day. The game doesn't mean anything. Both these teams are out of contention. If it's close, I'm calling it a strike, so be swinging.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of a thing. But let me back up and just put it this way. I don't think, Greeny, that it's a matter specifically of old school, new school. I think it's common sense versus let's not be ridiculous. For example, if a guy's got a no-hitter going and it's the 7th inning or later, and a guy bunts on him to break up the no-hitter, I'm sort of with the old school view. Come on, give him his chance, take a swing. But if it's a 1-run game and it's a playoff game or one that could influence a playoff game, then it doesn't make sense to apply that old school rule. In this situation, I just don't see the problem. He's a brilliant young star. He's exuberant. Why take the air out of that balloon? The score's 10-3. The bases are loaded. You know, the guy has a tendency to swing on 3-0. You've got the analytics now. Why groove one? You grooved one and he took you out of the park. That's your problem, not his. Now, here's something where I do kind of align myself with what generally is called old school thinking. I don't think that every single home run has to be celebrated as if you just won the 7th game of the World Series. I think there are times, when you look at some old footage, it actually strikes me as cooler sometimes. When a guy hits a big home run, he runs around the bases. Look at Hank Aaron on 7-15. How cool is that? How classy is that? How dignified is that? Everybody else is going nuts, and he's running out the same way as the first 714 that got him to that point. I don't think you should show other people up. And here's something that has a direct impact on the game. And when people say, hey, that's old school, they're insane when it comes to this. Guy hits a ball, stands at the plate. The ball hits the wall. Now he's either out at second or he's barely safe at second. And he says, well, I thought it was out. This is ridiculous. There's no defense for that. Whether it's 1930 or 2030, 10 years from now, run the damn ball out. And then I don't care if you run like Ricky Henderson once you've seen the umpire signal home run. That cannot be defended. So my point here, Greeny, is this is not old school, new school. It's common sense versus no sense. I think Tatis Jr. should be celebrated, and now everybody knows he might be swinging on 3-0. Don't groove one.
I completely agree. All right, very good. But Bob, now let me get to the next part of this here with baseball, because we just had a conversation about college sports, and I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. And one of the points that I made was this is a year where all rules go out the window. We've never lived through anything like this, and I think we all hope that we never will. This is a once-in-a-century type of circumstance. And so, as a result, we are seeing 7-inning doubleheaders. We are seeing runners starting an inning on second base in extra innings. We are going to see extra playoff teams in Major League Baseball. Do you like any of these changes enough that you would like to see them stick beyond a pandemic year?
Well, I've said from the start, if we're talking about this pandemic circumstance, short of running the bases clockwise, I think anything should be on the table. So I don't have a problem with any of it. However, I definitely do not like the runner on second base at the start of extra innings. It distorts the game. I don't like it at all. And the occasional 18, 19, even 20-inning game, that becomes part of baseball lore. It becomes something that people talk about. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If we're responding to the real problem of pace of play, then these little bits of fiddling around the edges. Let's point to first base on an intentional walk. You know how many intentional walks there are on average in a big league game? Averages out to about 1. And there's actually some drama in the 4 pitches high and wide, because then the camera cuts to the manager, cuts to the guy in the on-deck circle. He's been dissed. He's going to do something about this. The fans are booing because Mike Trout doesn't get a chance to swing the bat, or whoever it might be. The period of time that takes, which is probably less than a minute, actually builds drama and anticipation and has almost no positive impact on the pace of play issue. The pace of play issue should be addressed by a pitch clock with nobody on base and by umpires ordering guys to stay in the box. Guys cannot step out of the box. Ball one, you haven't even swung the bat. Step out of the box, adjust everything. Part of that is the J.D. Martinez school of running all of the data through your head, everything you've seen on video, all the printouts of data. I understand that, but it's got to be impressed upon the players that this is a situation in which they and those who run the game have a mutual interest. It's an entertainment product. The more entertaining it is, the greater our revenues are going to be, and those revenues eventually trickle down to everybody. So if you're going to address pace of play, address it in meaningful ways, not in window dressing ways that actually don't have any kind of positive impact.
Bob Costas with us here on Greeny on ESPN Radio. What do you think of what the NBA and the NHL have managed to do with these bubbles? We are seeing just unimaginable success with regard to the testing and the limited number. At some points, it's literally 0 positive tests. Mm-hmm. Their ability to put together these postseasons when so many, myself included, were highly skeptical of their ability to do it. What do you make in general of their ability to put together what they are for themselves and for all of us to watch?
They've done it exceptionally well, but they were in a position where they could do it. They were on the brink of their playoffs. And in the case of the NBA, you have small rosters. NHL, not as small as the NBA, but smaller than baseball and certainly smaller than football. Baseball had to play some semblance of a regular season, and the Players Association was adamantly against the suggested bubbles. And as it turns out, the suggested bubbles, where they have spring training sites in Arizona or in Florida, turn out to be surge states anyway. So I'm not so sure how well that would have worked out. And it's different to say we're going to have X number of basketball courts in a confined space than X number of baseball fields, which is going to be a more difficult thing. So in fairness, baseball really didn't have that option. Basketball and the NHL did, and they've executed it exceptionally well. Football, if we're talking about the NFL, does not have that option. And given the nature of the game and the size of the rosters and the time of the year that they plan to play, and the fact that some teams, not all, but some teams are going to allow a limited number of spectators, good luck getting from point A to point Z all the way across from September to some point in early February. Good luck.
Yeah, Bobby, I think all of us are just sort of crossing our fingers and rooting for the best, and we'll see what they're able to pull off. I guess I would like to ask you quickly, just as a lifelong broadcaster, this might be a little bit of an inside TV question, but I think that the job they've done, I watch a lot of NBA, I think the job they've done in putting together the product for the fans has been spectacular. I don't know. I actually asked Doris Burke yesterday just how different it actually feels inside the arena, because watching it on TV, I think they've done an incredible job of making it feel about as close to what a basketball game normally feels like as you possibly could.
I agree with that, and I think the use of the virtual fans is a clever and amusing touch. Again, the dimensions of the court and the way they can cut it so that you're not panning into empty stands or whatever, except for those shots of the virtual fans from one side of the court, you're able to cut it camera-wise so that the differences between this and a normal situation are minimized.
It just occurred to me, by the way, I wasn't going to ask you about this, but as you were talking, it occurred to me that at the height of maybe the most popular time that we've ever seen in the NBA on television, that you were right there in the middle of all of it, which would have been the Jordan Bulls. And we all just relived that this past summer during this pandemic with the Jordan films that we did here. And so I hadn't planned to ask you this, but it actually just did jump into my head. And of course, I saw that you were one of the many people interviewed for that. I just wonder what that experience was like for you watching those films and reliving all of that. And the Jordan era in particular, which I romanticize to the point sometimes that it's almost ridiculous. And maybe the biggest reason is that I was in my 20s and you look back on that time of your life just differently. But I was there in the middle of all of it in a very different way than you were. You had a much better seat than I did. What were your thoughts, and what did it make you think about when those films were on this summer?
First of all, I thought that Jason Hare and his team did a magnificent job with it. It was wonderful storytelling. People really were drawn in. The fact that we were hungry for original sports programming and the circumstances of the pandemic make it even more impactful. Yeah, but I think it would have basically had the same effect in any time frame. There were differences between the 90s and at present. We're not talking about comparing LeBron to Michael. We're not talking about whether the best of the Golden State Warriors would have beaten the Bulls. But think about the circumstances in the 90s. You had a compelling leading man in Michael Jordan. You had a team of interesting people around him, the coach, Pippen, Rodman, and others. You had the fact that they won 6 times in an 8-year stretch and won every time, except for one, I guess, where Michael Jordan played a full season. No, everyone.
They did. All the ones that he played a full season. Yeah, he played 17 games that one year.
Yeah, everyone in that stretch. But also think of, and it's crazy to refer to the following people as supporting cast members, but the Jordan Bulls come off of the 80s with Bird's Celtics, with Magic Johnson's Lakers. And when you say Bird's Celtics, that includes Parrish and McHale and Johnson and Ainge. And when you say Magic Johnson's Lakers, that includes Kareem and James Worthy and Byron Scott and Pat Riley as their coach. And within that decade, you've got Dr. J and Moses Malone and the Lakers. And during the 90s, you've got Barkley's Suns and Stockton and Malone's Jazz and Clyde Drexler with the Portland Trailblazers and Pat Riley's Knicks throwing a challenge at the Bulls. And then you got the Dream Team smack in the middle of it as the NBA goes global. And you can factor in a bias on this next point on my part, but it makes a huge difference that the NBA was first on CBS and then it was on NBC. This takes nothing away from the quality of the broadcasting and the production for the NBA on TNT. Their studio show is maybe the best studio show in the history of American sports television. The quality of the announcing, Mike Breen, et cetera, it's all terrific. But the NBA was on NBC during that era. It wasn't just how well those games were produced and directed, and I'd like to think how well they were broadcast, but also you had double headers on weeknights in prime time on a network in an entirely different television landscape. The promos for these games were on the Today Show and the Tonight Show, on David Letterman, on ER, on Seinfeld. It was much more central to the cultural conversation. If it were now, would Michael Jordan be as compelling and as great? Yes. Would it land the same way in American pop culture? It would not.
Yeah, I've said many times that Michael Jordan came along right at the time when the world got a lot bigger, and LeBron has come along at a time when the world has gotten a lot smaller. And
you just said it better and more concisely than I did.
Yeah, but it was an unbelievable memory. All right, one more for you, Bob. You know how much I appreciate this. So I had Brett Favre on yesterday, and I made the observation that Favre, the the extent to which his fans loved him was actually greater than how great he was. As great as he was, and he was a first ballot Hall of Famer and 100% worthy of that. But the people who loved him in an entirely different way. And it reminds me of the way my father was with Joe DiMaggio. My father loved Joe DiMaggio in a way that was completely disproportional to the way you should feel about an athlete. And so I talked about who was your Brett Favre with my audience yesterday. Bob Costas, growing up, obviously loving sports as you did. Who was your Brett Favre?
Well, it wasn't football. It was baseball. And people are tired of hearing me say this, but my guy was Mickey Mantle. My closest cousin among my many cousins was 2 years older than me, is 2 years older than me. His guy was Willie Mays because he could remember the first baseball game he ever went to. It was at the Polo Grounds. We both grew up in New York, and he saw Willie Mays. The first game that I vividly remember going to was in 1959. The Giants and the Dodgers had moved west. The Mets didn't exist yet. The Yankees were the only team in New York, and they were the best team in the American League, perhaps at times the best team in all of baseball. Mantle was the greatest star in the American League. Their games were on television a lot, which was not true of most of the country in the late 1950s and early 1960s. So I'm watching all these games on a black and white television, or I'm listening to Mel Allen and Red Barber call the games on the radio. So Mickey Mantle captured my imagination, and he was my guy. Can I look at him objectively? Yes, I can. But can Mike Trout have the same effect on me watching him now? I can appreciate him. I enjoy watching him. Is it going to have the same effect on me? No. And if it did, it would be weird. Why would a man in his 60s feel the same way about Mike Trout as the kid who was 8 or 9 felt the same way about Mickey Mantle? And sometimes when idiots say, oh, he never relinquished his hero worship. No, you fool. I'm recalling it. I'm recalling it for you. I'm not still living in that same childhood haze.
Thank you for cleaning that up, by the way. The use of fool there was excellent. Bob Costas, you know how much I appreciate this. Thank you so much. I hope that when all this is this madness is behind us, that we can get together sometime soon. Thank you very much for the time today.
I hope so, too. Stay well, Greeny. Bye.
You too. Take care. The great Bob Costas. Again, I've told this story many times, but when I started in the business, Sports Illustrated did a big story about him, just a huge profile. And I had a briefcase at that time. I was a 20-something-year-old kid. My uncle had given me a briefcase as a graduation gift when I graduated from college. And so I, like a dope, am walking around with a briefcase covering sports, which is ridiculous. But I put that magazine in that briefcase, and I just had it with me all the time. And I just kept saying, that's the guy I want to be. That was the person that I wanted to be. And so I've frequently been called in my career a poor man's Bob Costas, and I consider that the best compliment you could ever pay me. David Pollack still to come as we continue here. This is Greeny, and right now a word from Straight Talk Wireless. It's time for some Straight Talk. You know what a full court press is in basketball, right? Full defensive coverage with no holes. Well, that's the kind of coverage you get with Straight Talk Wireless. It runs on America's best network, same as big carriers, but for a lot less. Just $45 a month gets you the unlimited plan with 25 gigs of high-speed data, then 2G for up to 50% less. And I will set it up by once again playing for you what my buddy Jay Will said this morning on the show, the morning show. I'm going to call them KJZ. It's unwieldy to constantly be saying their entire names. KJZ this morning, Keyshawn and Jay Will and Zubin. Jay Will was talking about the performance of Luka Doncic. Tim Legler on my show this morning, Get Up, said the next decade in the NBA is going to be the Doncic decade. He has scored more points in his first 2 playoff games than any player in history except for George Mikan in 1949. And Jay Will said this.
I'm not worried about the Clippers as much as I am in awe of the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks are everything that the Philadelphia 76ers want to be.
Yes, that's exactly right. They were everything the Sixers planned to be. They are the process. I don't know that they did it this way purposely, although they obviously struck gold in Doncic, and they saw the opportunity to take Porzingis off the Knicks, pair the two of them together, and here's what I'll say. If the process was supposed to lead you to having the best young duo in the NBA, in a sport where you don't have trios anymore, by Kawhi Leonard last year deciding not to go to the Lakers and join AD and LeBron, you're now, for the most part, looking at dynamic duos. So you've got LeBron and AD, You've got Russell and Russell and James Harden. You've got Paul George and Kawhi. You've got some of these other duos. When you consider the youth of Porzingis and Doncic, there is no team. I will make this a definitive statement, and someone tell me where I'm wrong. There is no team whose future is brighter in professional basketball than Dallas. No team. Because if you put the right pieces around those two guys, no one is as good as they are. Think about what the NBA is, what it has become, and what it figures to be. Luka Doncic is the exact guy you want with the ball in his hands. And Kristaps Porzingis is the exact piece. He's 7'3", shooting 30-footers. He has range that very few guards would have had a generation ago, and he's 7'3". He is the next iteration of what Dirk Nowitzki once was. You put the right pieces around those guys, and they're doing an unbelievable job. Again, they're getting contributions off the bench last night from guys you would never even imagine. Seth Curry and Boban playing huge for them, but forget about that even, because I don't think they're going to win this series, as great as they have looked so far. But whether they do or they don't, there is no brighter future in the NBA than the future in Dallas. That's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is this, and it involves what Paul Pierce said on First Take the other day. I'll play it for you. This was Paul Pierce, and just bear in mind, he and LeBron have a history, but he's certainly entitled to his opinion. Paul is a future Hall of Famer, and this is what he said about LeBron and the Lakers being in a 1-0 hole right now to Portland.
If they don't win this year, LeBron's not getting any younger. This is going to be a big hit on his legacy, and I've already said he's not a top 5 player of all time. If the Lakers don't win a championship, let alone lose in the first round, I don't want to hear none of this GOAT talk no more.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack. It is remarkable how many different things he said in 15 seconds. So let's start with this. I do believe losing this series, losing as a 1 seed with another top 10 player in the league as your teammate in the first round of a playoff series or playoff run would be damaging. The only thing that would soften that would be the circumstances. I think the fact that it's happening in a bubble and that we're living in a pandemic and all of the other craziness that is going on right now would make that feel a little bit less egregious than it would in a normal year. But it would certainly have to hurt because LeBron James is competing with ghosts, right? He's competing with Michael Jordan and Oscar Robertson and people like that. He's not even competing with Dame Lillard, who might beat him. I don't think he's going to. And this is the reason, because the reason I believe the Lakers are going to come back and win, I think they will play huge tonight. I think LeBron and AD will combine for 70 points. I think they will win easily tonight and wind up winning the series in 5 or 6 games, is because players like LeBron don't lose this series. It just doesn't happen. You never make a fortune betting on things in sports that never happen. This never happens. Even in a bubble, I don't believe it'll happen. So I do believe that there is something on the line here, something at stake legacy-wise for LeBron in this series, but I believe he will come out of it fine. I believe they will win. He will find a way, because players like him don't lose series like this. Then there's Paul saying he doesn't believe LeBron is a top 5 player. That's a fascinating one. I know a lot of people whose opinions I value who say they think LeBron is the greatest player of all time. I'm not one of them. But there are people whose opinion matters to me who will tell you that. Here's what I would say. In basketball, we put together these Mount Rushmores. Here's the way I put my Mount Rushmore together. To me, 3 of the spots are easy. Michael Jordan, to me, is the greatest player that ever lived. He's on Mount Rushmore. Bill Russell is the greatest winner who ever lived. He's on Mount Rushmore. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the most accomplished player who ever lived. He's on the basketball Mount Rushmore. For me, those 3 guys have to be on there. There is no legitimate basketball Mount Rushmore, in my opinion, that doesn't have those 3 faces on it. The question then becomes about who's 4th. And there are a lot of players that I think you could argue for and defend. And LeBron James is one of them. If you put LeBron James in that 4th spot, I would 100%, well, I wouldn't necessarily agree, but I wouldn't fight you. If you put Magic Johnson in that spot, I wouldn't fight you. If you put Wilt Chamberlain in that spot, I wouldn't fight you. If you put Oscar Robertson in that spot, I wouldn't fight you. It might end there. Kobe? You could put Kobe in that spot. I wouldn't fight you. Tim Duncan. We're getting in a little bit, the list is getting a little too long. I guess what I'm saying is I could see putting LeBron as high as 4th, and I could see putting LeBron as low as 7th or 8th. These things are just opinion. It's just a question of who you like better. I mean, Wilt Chamberlain has his own record book. The numbers on Wilt Chamberlain are so ridiculous as to be incomparable to anybody else. Guy averaged 50 points in a season. So it's impossible to compare that to anybody else. I can't sit here and tell you you're an idiot if you think he's a better player than LeBron James. In my opinion, I put LeBron ahead of him. When we did this Mount Rushmore on Mike and Mike years ago, I put Oscar there because I wanted to respect the past. But if you wanted to put Magic there, I'm good with it. You want to put Wilt there, I'm good with it. You want to put LeBron there, I'm good with it. So when everyone went crazy that Paul Pierce said, how can you say LeBron is not a top 5 player? I don't think it's that crazy. It's an opinion. And when you consider the history the two of them have, I'm not surprised that it's his opinion. You can stream Our Time, the new series on ESPN Plus. Get an all-access look at Oklahoma State football as they reopen campus, deal with COVID-19 testing, and an investigation of head coach Mike Gundy. Stream new episodes every Thursday only on ESPN Plus. We haven't talked anything about the NFL today. I'm going to change that coming up next. Is there a more dangerous player in football right now than Lamar Jackson? The answer is yes, and I'll tell you who it is right after this. I'm Greeny, and this is ESPN Radio.
Geico is now up.
All right, we're back. Greeny with you here. ESPN Radio presented by Progressive Insurance. It's that time of year. The NFL's almost here. ESPN Fantasy Football's around the corner. Draft your team, compete with your friends. Take home the crown. Sign up now at ESPN.com/fantasyfootball. Today, Lamar Jackson would obviously be a very popular quarterback pick. Having put up numbers last year that were bordering on ridiculous. As I pointed out for you on TV a couple of weeks ago, since he became the starter in Baltimore, week 11 of his rookie year, he's the winningest quarterback in the sport. He's thrown more touchdowns than Tom Brady with fewer picks than Patrick Mahomes. He has run for more yards, rushed for more yards than Saquon Barkley on 52 fewer carries. And he was the unanimous MVP in his second season. He makes defenders look silly, almost as silly as all those evaluators who told him he should play a different position in the NFL. But now we had an interesting conversation this morning on Get Up. Our Jeremy Fowler did a story in which one executive said that Lamar Jackson, as dangerous as he is, as difficult to contain as he is, might only be the second most difficult to contain quarterback in the sport this coming season. And that everyone should have their eyes on Kyler Murray in Arizona. And I'm now going to do what so many seem unwilling to do when it comes to Lamar Jackson. All these people who are putting Lamar Jackson on the second tier and saying they need to see it one more year and talking about how he hasn't won a playoff game despite the fact that he just turned 23. All of those who are just not willing to admit how good he is because they were wrong about him, I'll do it. I was wrong about Kyler Murray. I said I wouldn't draft him because he's just too small. And when you watch him play, I still can't believe how good he is because he's just so small. When you watch him run around out there on a football field, it boggles my mind how small he looks, and yet he's great. He's obviously just great. All of you were right, and I was wrong. It's not that hard to say. Lots of people are wrong about their projections on stuff. There's nothing wrong with it if you just admit it. So I admit it. I was dead wrong on Kyler Murray, and I think he's going to be unbelievable. The acquisition of DeAndre Hopkins this year, the conversation we had this morning was, is it possible that Murray, well, he isn't as inclined to run, and they certainly don't have an offense that's designed for him to run the way the Baltimore offense is designed for Lamar Jackson to run. Is it possible that he is nearly as dangerous a runner and actually at this point a better passer than Jackson is? It's possible. And you take into account that they just got a guy who, in my opinion, is the best receiver in the NFL, DeAndre Hopkins, and they still have the wily veteran there in Larry Fitzgerald. Is it possible that Kyler Murray will actually have the best season statistically of any quarterback in the NFL this year? You're darn right it's possible. I think that is a guy to watch, fantasy-wise and otherwise. The NFC West is the best division in the sport by far. The Seahawks just made a huge acquisition They just got the best safety in football. They add that to a team that has Russell Wilson that was 1 yard away from being the 1 seed in the West last year. The 49ers obviously had the lead in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl last year. The Rams were in the Super Bowl the year before, and I think Arizona is going to be much better. So that's a great division. We'll see how it goes. But one way or another, it's just an interesting way of looking at it. As we start spending these days together, you'll find I love football. I love talking about football. I will love hearing from you on these thoughts on football. We'll have Ryan Clark on here tomorrow. We'll bounce this thought off him and many others. But obviously right now we're in the midst of the NBA playoffs, and they're here on ESPN Radio. Tune in tonight as LeBron and the Lakers battle the Blazers, presented by Indeed. Coverage begins at 8 Eastern on most of these ESPN radio stations. I've already told you what's going to happen tonight. The Lakers are going to win. LeBron is going to play huge. Anthony Davis is going to play huge. And the reason they're going to win is because that player doesn't lose this series. Just look back in the history of the NBA. It just doesn't happen. The Immortals don't lose in the first round. Not to an 8th seed. I don't care if they're in a... I understand the circumstances are unprecedented. They're in a bubble. There are no fans. And the Trailblazers are not your everyday 8 seed. As they got healthy and Dame Lillard had the season he's had... If this season had gone to its conclusion, they would have finished higher than 8th. But it is what it is. The Lakers aren't going to lose this series. There's just no way. No one ever gets rich betting on things in sports that never happen. So LeBron will win this series. They'll bounce back tonight. They'll win. They'll play big. The world will feel normal again. I think the Clippers are in bigger trouble than they are, but they're not in trouble either. I think they'll win. I don't think we're looking at any huge upsets in the first round. Would we consider Utah over Denver a huge upset? I don't think that would be huge. I wouldn't characterize that as huge. Orlando's not going to beat Milwaukee. I don't think we're looking at anything that could even really be described as a significant upset in this first round. I'll tell you what I am interested in. The lottery tonight, we had Bilas on earlier talking about how deep this is a lottery where we just don't know these players. Now, last year was all about Zion, obviously, and I think it might have been the highest rated lottery ever, or it was the highest rated in a very long time because everyone wanted to see where he'd wind up. Bilas said he thinks the first 3 picks this year are where the huge difference gets made. That's where the drop-off is. So do the Warriors wind up in that top 3? If Golden State, if all those guys come back healthy, obviously Clay and Steph, and all of them come back healthy, and they add another really meaningful piece, watch out. The battle may be joined in the West. The Warriors could be back at it before you know it. So that's something to keep an eye on tonight. And then Jay talked a little about LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball is a kid that we've all known since before Lonzo got to UCLA and before his dad became a household name. LaMelo Ball is someone was firing up Instagram, years ago. My son, who at the time was probably 12, was showing me videos of LaMelo Ball years ago. And here it is, finally. And it's interesting. He comes in with so much less hype than his brother did. Lonzo, because of the ball factor, because of Lamar and because of everything else that happened, LeVar, and everything else that happened, there was so much conversation around Lonzo. And it is remarkable how under the radar the LaMelo thing is. But some team is going to draft LaMelo Ball. And I just wonder if all of that hoopla and conversation starts again. I really don't know what to expect. I haven't heard LeVar Ball's name in a while. Has anyone? Am I just missing it? I feel like I'm reasonably well plugged in. I host a show every single day, and now I host 2. So I'd think if people were talking about him, I would have heard it. So I wonder if all of that, all of the craziness, call it whatever you want, that surrounded the family has sort of dissipated, and now we all of a sudden just become in a place where LaMelo Ball either is or isn't going to wind up being a great player. I think his brother is going to be a really good player on what is eventually going to be a really good team in New Orleans with Zion. We'll see what LaMelo becomes tonight. Maybe we find out where he goes. Fun day today. I'll see you tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time for Get Up On.